I was standing in the middle of the Kessler family living room, still holding a gift bag I had bought in a rush from a flower shop 2 blocks from my apartment. Margot took my hand and turned to her mother. "This is Desmond," she said. "My boyfriend." I did not move. I did not breathe right. All I could see was the look in her eyes, quietly begging me not to say a single word that would take that lie apart. And somewhere underneath my own shock, I already knew I was not going to. "My name is Desmond Langford. I am 39 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life doing work that most people never think about until it goes wrong. I am a sound engineer. I build studios. I fix broken mic preamps at 2 in the morning. I make sure that when someone speaks into a microphone, what comes out the other side sounds like the truth of their voice and nothing less. It is quiet work. It rewards patience over noise, and I have always believed that is part of why it drew me in the first place. There is a kind of honesty in sound that you cannot fake, no matter how good your equipment is. Either the room is right, or it is not. Either the voice sounds true, or it does not. I like that certainty. I built my whole life around it. I live alone in Nashville, Tennessee, in a 2-bedroom house I bought 4 years ago with money I had been saving carefully since I was in my 20s. My marriage ended around that same time, and if you are waiting for a dramatic story about betrayal or heartbreak, I am sorry to disappoint you. It was not like that. My ex-wife Talia and I simply grew into 2 different people, walking in 2 different directions. We had no children together, no lawyers shouting across a table. There's no version of the story where someone was the clear villain. We just stopped being the reason the other person got out of bed in the morning, and one day we sat down and admitted it to each other, instead of pretending otherwise for another 5 years. That kind of ending does not make for a good headline, but it made for an honest one, and I have always believed honest endings deserve some respect, even when they are quiet. After the divorce, I built a life that fit exactly one person. I liked my coffee black, my mornings unhurried, and my evenings spent in the studio long after everyone else had gone home for the day. I was not lonely in any way that kept me up at night worrying about it. I had simply made peace with the size of my own life, and for a long time, that peace felt like enough. That peace held steady, undisturbed, until I started working for Kessler Media, a communications company that had been built by 3 generations of one family and was now run, with a kind of calm precision I had rarely seen in anyone, by Margot Kessler. Margot was 35 years old, and she was the kind of person people in that building talked about in 2 different tones at once, admiration in one breath, a careful kind of caution in the next, the way you talk about someone whose power you respect but do not fully understand. She was the chief executive, the name printed at the top of the letterhead, the person whose decisions moved dozens of careers at a time without most of those people ever knowing her name personally. But she was not what I expected from someone carrying that much weight. She remembered the names of the security guards downstairs, asked about their kids by name. She knocked before she walked into my studio, every single time, even though it was technically her building and she did not owe me that small courtesy. I ran the internal studio at Kessler Media, recorded voiceovers for their training videos, mixed audio for board presentations, made sure that when the company needed to sound a certain way to the outside world, it actually did. I was not part of her inner circle. I was not in the rooms where decisions about the company's future got made. I was the guy with the headphones on, the one people trusted to make things sound right, without needing a long explanation of why it mattered. I did my job well, and for the better part of a year, that was the whole story between us. I saw Margot Kessler maybe twice a month, usually when she stopped by to approve a final mix before it went out to investors or board members. She was polite, professional, precise about what she wanted, and nothing more than that. I respected it. I did not think about her outside of those hours, and as far as I knew back then, she did not think about me either. That changed slowly, in a way I did not notice happening until it already had. It started with coffee. Margot began stopping by the studio after hours, usually with 2 cups from the place across the street, one black, one with cream and sugar. She never asked how I took mine, she just knew. The second time she came by, and every single time after that, without fail, for months. At first I told myself it was simple kindness, The kind a good boss shows the people who keep the machinery of a company running quietly in the background where nobody thinks to look. But the visits kept happening, and slowly they stopped being about work at all. She would sit on the stool across from the mixing board and ask about my life in a way that felt like she actually wanted the answer. Not like she was filling silence before a meeting somewhere else. "You built all this yourself?" she asked one night, looking around the studio at the equipment I had spent years collecting and calibrating, piece by piece, until it finally sounded the way I needed it to. "Piece by piece," I told her. "Nothing here happened fast." She smiled at that in a way I did not understand yet, a smile that seemed to be about something bigger than a room full of cables and monitors. "I like that," she said quietly. "Things that don't happen fast tend to be the things that actually last." I noticed the watch before I understood what it meant. She carried an old silver pocket watch, the kind you do not see much anymore outside of antique shops, and when she was nervous, or thinking hard about something she was not saying out loud, she would take it out of her jacket pocket and turn it slowly between two fingers, over and over, like a small ritual only she understood. "Whose is that?" I asked her once, nodding toward it. "My grandfather's," she said, running her thumb along the engraved letter M on its case. "He told me time is the one thing nobody ever gets back, so you had better spend it on the right people." She said it lightly, almost like it was just a piece of family history she was passing along out of habit. But there was something underneath the words I could not name at the time. Looking back now, I understand exactly what she meant by it. I simply was not ready to hear it yet. Not really, not in the way it was being offered to me. There were other signs too. Small ones I filed away without ever connecting them into anything larger. She remembered a song I had hummed under my breath one afternoon while running cables across the floor, and weeks later I found the very same song queued up on the studio speakers when I walked in one morning. She kept my coffee order exactly right, every single time, for months in a row, without ever once writing it down that I saw. I told myself she was just thorough. That is what good executives do. I reasoned they notice small details. They remember things about the people around them. It is part of what makes them effective at their jobs. I did not let myself seriously consider the other explanation, because it did not seem like something that could possibly be true, not for someone like her, and certainly not about someone like me. Underneath all of that, though, something else was quietly building in her life that I only ever saw the edges of. The way you notice weather changing before you understand the storm behind it. She started taking certain calls in the hallway outside the studio instead of in her office, her voice dropping low and tight in a way I had never heard from her before that fall. She would come back in afterward, sit down across from me, and turn the watch over in her hand 2 or 3 times before she said anything at all, like she was gathering herself before she trusted her own voice again. "Everything okay?" I asked her, more than once, careful not to push too hard. "Family stuff," she would say, and leave it there, folding the sentence shut before I could ask anything more. I did not push further. It was not my place to push, or so I kept telling myself, night after night. What I did not know then, what I only pieced together much later, was that her family had been pressuring her for months, quietly but persistently, to reconcile, in a business sense, with a man named Julian Cade. Julian had once been engaged to Margot, years before I ever came into the picture, and even after that engagement had ended badly, he had held onto a real stake in Kessler Media through an old family arrangement that nobody had ever bothered to properly unwind. Her parents believed that if Margot and Julian repaired their personal relationship, it would smooth over a complicated ownership structure that had been causing friction on the board for years, quietly draining the family's patience. To them, it was simple math, a clean solution to a messy problem. To Margot, it was a version of her future being decided by people who were not the ones actually living inside of it. I did not know any of this at the time. I only knew that something was weighing on her, sitting on her shoulders in a way she was working very hard to hide, and that she kept coming back to my studio in the evenings, like it was the one room left in her life where nobody was asking her for anything at all. By late fall, I had stopped pretending, at least to myself, that I looked forward to those evenings for reasons that had anything to do with coffee or songs. I found myself glancing at the clock around 6 most evenings, wondering whether she would stop by. I never said any of that out loud to her. It did not seem like something I was allowed to say. not to my boss. Her birthday fell on a Saturday that year, and she invited me to the small family dinner at her parents' house, almost as an afterthought, the way you invite someone you have quietly started to trust without fully admitting to yourself why you trust them. "You don't have to come," she said, almost too quickly. "It's just family, and honestly, it can get a little intense." "I'll come," I told her, and I meant it before I had even finished the sentence. I do not fully know why I said yes so fast. Maybe I already understood, somewhere underneath my own reasoning, that I wanted to be there beside her. The house was warm and smelled like something baking in the oven. Low jazz playing from a speaker in the corner of the living room. String lights strung along the porch outside, catching the last of the evening light. Margot introduced me to her father, who shook my hand with the firm, appraising grip of a man used to sizing people up before he decided what to think of them. Everything felt calm enough until her mother, mid-conversation, turned to Margot with a question that seemed to drop the temperature of the entire room by 10 degrees in an instant. "So when are you and Julian going to sort out the business side of things again? Your father and I really think it's time we settled this." I watched Margot's hand tighten around the watch inside her jacket pocket. Her knuckles went pale around it. For a second, she did not answer at all, and the silence stretched out long enough that I felt it settle heavy in my own chest, uninvited. Then she reached over, took my hand in front of everyone, and turned back to face her mother. "Mom, this is Desmond," she said, steady now. "My boyfriend." That was the moment. The one I already told you about at the very start, except now you understand what led up to it: the coffee, the watch, the calls in the hallway, the years of quiet pressure from a family trying to solve a business problem by rearranging her heart for her. I did not know any of that full history yet, standing there in that living room under the string lights. I only knew that she had reached for my hand like I was the only steady thing left in the room, and that whatever came next, I was not going to be the one to let go of it first. I found out exactly who Julian Cade was 3 days after that dinner, and I found out the hard way, the way you learn about a storm by standing directly in it. He called the studio directly, which should have told me something right there, since almost nobody outside the company even had that number. His voice was smooth in the particular way certain men's voices get when they have spent a long time being listened to, without ever having to raise their volume to get it. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said, unhurried. "Margot's new boyfriend, the sound engineer." He said the words like they were a punchline he was still deciding whether to laugh at out loud. I kept my voice level, careful not to give him anything to work with. "Can I help you with something?" "Not yet," he said, "but you will be hearing from me soon enough." I hung up that call and sat in the studio for a long while afterward, not touching the board, just running his tone back through my head, trying to figure out exactly what kind of threat I had just been handed. I had built a career out of listening carefully to how things sound underneath the words, and something about Julian's voice had the calm, patient quality of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the room to catch up to him. I did not think much of it, honestly, until the following week, when Margot told me, in a voice much smaller than the one she used in board meetings, that Julian had formally requested a shareholder session, one where he intended to raise, in front of the entire board and both of her parents, the question of whether her new relationship was a genuine one or a convenient fiction invented at exactly the right moment to make an old business arrangement quietly disappear. I need to explain something about Julian here, because it matters for everything that happened next. He was not simply an ex-fiancé nursing old feelings from a distance. Through that same family arrangement her parents kept quietly referencing at dinner, Julian still held a real stake in Kessler Media, enough to make his voice carry weight in that boardroom, enough that if he chose to make noise, people were obligated to listen closely. He had spent the 2 weeks after that birthday dinner doing exactly what I had feared the moment I first heard his voice on the phone, digging, carefully and thoroughly. He found out, easily enough, that Desmond Langford was a contract sound engineer with no public history of any relationship with Margot Kessler prior to that dinner. To him, that absence was proof of something. To me, it was simply the truth, arriving at an inconvenient time for reasons that had nothing to do with either of us. The shareholder session took place on a Thursday afternoon in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor, the kind of room where every word gets heard by more people than are actually seated at the table, where silence itself seems to carry information. I had never been in a meeting like that in my entire life, and I would not have been in this one either, except Margot asked me directly to be there beside her. She said she did not want to face it alone, and I was not about to tell her no, not after everything that had already passed between us. Julian stood up when it was his turn to speak, adjusting his jacket with the unhurried confidence of a man who already believed he knew exactly how the story would end. "I think we all deserve some clarity here," he said, looking slowly around the table before his eyes finally landed on me. Margot introduced a man to her family 2 weeks ago as her boyfriend, a man who, as far as anyone can tell, has no history with her outside of this building. I would like to understand whether this company is being asked to take seriously a relationship that actually exists, or a relationship that was invented at a very convenient moment, right when this board was scheduled to revisit the ownership structure her parents and I have discussed for years. He looked me over slowly then. "The way you size up something you have already privately decided is beneath you. No offense to the sound engineer," he said, letting the words land with a small, deliberate smile. "But do you really expect anyone in this room to believe a woman running a media company fell for a man who fixes microphones for a living? Or is this simply a performance, timed precisely to keep me out of a company my family helped build from nothing?" I did not answer right away. I looked over at Margot instead, waiting. Her hand was in her jacket pocket, and I knew without needing to see it directly that she was holding onto that watch like it was the only solid thing left in the entire room. Her face had lost the calm, composed authority I had come to associate with her over the past year. For the first time since I had known her, she looked like someone genuinely afraid of losing something that mattered to her more than she had ever let on. I thought, in that exact moment, about Talia. My ex-wife had called me the evening before, completely unrelated to any of this, just checking in the way she still did every few months since our divorce. I had told her, in a few careful sentences, what was about to happen the next day. She had gone quiet for a second on the line, and then she said something I have not forgotten since. "You sound like you actually care what happens to her," Talia said. There was no bitterness in it at all, no old wound reopening between us, just a plain observation, offered the way an old friend offers one, without needing anything back. "That's different from how you used to talk about things at work, back when we were married." She was right, and hearing her say it so calmly, without any agenda of her own attached to it, made something click into place for me that I had been carefully avoiding looking at head-on for longer than I wanted to admit. I thanked her for that, quietly, and she told me to go take care of the woman I clearly already cared about, which was, in its own small way, the kindest thing my ex-wife had ever said to me. Back in that conference room, Julian was still talking, laying out numbers, precedent, old family agreements dating back years, building a careful case designed to make Margot look reckless and to make me look like nothing more than a convenient prop. Nobody at that table spoke up in our defense, not right away. I watched her knuckles whiten further around the watch hidden in her pocket, and I understood, sitting there and watching her take it without flinching outwardly, that whatever this was between us, it had already cost her far more than I had let myself fully realize until that afternoon. I did not say much in that meeting. I was not asked to speak, and it was not entirely my place, but I stayed until the very end. And when it was finally over, I walked out beside her instead of letting her walk out alone into that hallway. And I think that was the first time either of us admitted, without saying a single word out loud, that this had stopped being about convenience a long time before that room ever existed. 2 days after that meeting, Margot showed up at the studio after everyone else had already gone home, the way she used to before any of this started between us. She did not say hello first. She reached into her jacket, took out the silver watch, and pressed it directly into my hand before I even had a chance to ask her what she was doing there so late. "My grandfather told me that time is the one thing nobody ever gets back," she said, her voice quieter than I had ever once heard it in the year I had known her. "That you have to spend it on the right people. I spent years of mine on the wrong ones. On Julian, back when we were engaged. On this company, when it was easier than looking at my own life honestly." She stopped there, and I watched her visibly steady herself before she kept going, her breath catching just slightly. "I don't want to get that wrong again. Not this time." I held the watch carefully in my palm. It was lighter than I expected it to be, but it felt like it was carrying far more weight than something that small should reasonably be able to hold. I thought about all the times I had watched her turn it over in her hands without asking what it meant to her. All the evenings I had told myself it was simply a nervous habit, nothing more. Standing there in the empty studio, I understood I had been looking right at the answer for months and calling it something safer. Margot stood there quietly, waiting, letting the silence do some of the talking for her the way she rarely allowed herself to do in front of anyone else. "That night at your parents' house," I said slowly, "was that only about Julian? Only about getting your mother off your back for one evening?" She shook her head slowly, deliberately. I told myself that's all it was, at first, because that was easier to admit to myself. But I had been thinking about you long before that dinner, Desmond. The coffee, the songs, all of it. I wasn't just being thorough, the way you assumed. I was paying attention to you because I genuinely wanted to. Her voice caught slightly on the last few words. I wasn't performing that night. I really wasn't. I've cared about you for a long time now. I just didn't have the courage to say it any other way, not with everything else pressing in on me. I did not answer her immediately. I turned the watch over once in my hand, feeling the cool metal against my palm, hearing the faint, steady tick of it underneath my fingers, the same sound I imagine her grandfather must have heard decades before either of us was ever born into this. I thought about everything that had led us to that room, the coffee she never had to ask about twice, the song she remembered from a single afternoon. None of it had been thoroughness. All of it had been her, quietly choosing me, long before either of us said it plainly. "Then stop calling me your fake boyfriend," I told her finally, quietly. "Let me be a real one instead." She let out a breath I do not think she even knew she had been holding in for days, maybe longer, and for the first time since that entire ordeal began, I saw something in her face that looked like relief instead of fear. Outside the studio window, it had started to rain, the kind of quiet, steady rain that does not announce itself with any drama. It just settles gently over a city and stays a while without asking permission. I stood there holding a piece of her family's entire history in my open hand, and I understood, clearly, that whatever came next, we were not going to be able to undo this decision between us, and honestly, neither of us wanted to. "Julian isn't going to let this go quietly," she said after a long moment, watching me carefully. "He has real leverage in that boardroom. This isn't finished, not by a long way." Her voice wavered slightly on that last part, and I realized this was the most afraid I had ever seen her look, more afraid than she had let herself appear, even in that glass-walled conference room full of people ready to judge her. "Then we don't finish it quietly either," I told her, meeting her eyes. "We finish it honestly. Let the board see exactly what this actually is, without either of us hiding behind anything anymore." She looked at me for a long moment then, like she was deciding whether to fully trust that answer, and then she nodded, slow and certain, the same way I imagine she nodded at decisions that actually mattered to her most. I gave her the watch back that night, but something between the two of us had already changed hands in a way that no piece of old silver could ever properly measure. I had spent over a year telling myself that her kindness toward me was simply the way a good boss treated a reliable employee. Standing there in that studio, rain tapping steadily against the window glass, I finally let myself believe the truth she had just handed me, plainly, without hiding behind convenience or fear anymore. We did not solve the Julian situation that night, not even close. We did not solve the board, or her parents, or the year of quiet pressure that had built up around her like weight she had been carrying entirely alone before I ever showed up in her life. But we stopped pretending, both of us, about what this actually was between us. And once that pretending finally stopped, everything that came after it moved differently, lighter somehow, even with the hard part still ahead of us. 6 months later, Julian Cade was gone from Kessler Media entirely. The board, once they saw the full picture laid out honestly, not the version Julian had carefully presented that afternoon, but the real one, including years of quiet family pressure, aimed at forcing a personal reconciliation to solve what was ultimately a business problem, voted to buy out his remaining stake in full. He left without much noise in the end, which I have come to believe was its own kind of quiet admission. A man who is genuinely confident in his position rarely leaves a room that quietly, without a single word on his way out the door. Margot and I did not rush anything after that rainy night in the studio. We built what we had slowly, on purpose, the same patient way I built every studio I had ever worked in throughout my career, piece by piece, testing each part carefully before adding the next one on top of it. We went to dinner without hiding it from anyone anymore. We told people the truth whenever they asked, and for the first time in a long while, the truth was simple enough that we could just say it out loud without flinching. There were still hard weeks in there, weeks where the board asked pointed questions about optics, where a few people in the building assumed I had been promoted into her life rather than invited into it honestly. I let most of that roll past me. I had spent a career learning that the loudest opinion in a room is rarely the most accurate one, and I trusted that the people who actually mattered would eventually hear the truth clearly enough, in the same way a well-built room eventually reveals whether a voice is honest or not. Margot, for her part, stopped explaining herself to anyone who had not earned the explanation. That alone told me something had shifted permanently in her, something Julian's whole campaign had never managed to touch. We took things slow in the ordinary ways, too. Sunday mornings became a fixed point on the calendar, coffee at my kitchen table before either of us looked at a single work email. She started leaving a jacket at my place, the same one with the pocket where that watch used to live before she handed it over to me for good. I learned the particular quiet she got into on the anniversary of her grandfather's passing, and I learned not to fill that quiet with words, just to sit in it with her until she was ready to talk again. Her father, over time, stopped asking me appraising questions altogether and started simply talking to me the way he talked to people he had already decided to trust. He told me once, over coffee on the back porch, that he had pushed the Julian arrangement for years because it felt safer than the alternative, and that watching his daughter finally stand up in that boardroom had taught him more about her than a decade of quarterly reports ever had. I did not say much back. I just nodded and let him say the rest of it in his own time, the way I had learned to do with Margot herself. It struck me, sitting on that porch, how much had changed since the night her mother had first put both of us on the spot at that same table. Nobody in that family needed convincing anymore, not after everything they had watched unfold. They had simply watched, patiently, and drawn their own honest conclusions, the same way I had once let a room full of recording equipment tell me the truth before I trusted my own ears. 6 months in, I sat beside her at a real family dinner, not a staged one, not a rescue mission dressed up as a birthday party, just an ordinary Sunday meal at her parents' house. Like countless other families have on countless other Sundays, her mother refilled my glass without even asking, the quiet way you do for someone who has already earned a permanent place at your table. Her father asked me actual questions about my work that evening, curious ones, genuinely interested ones, nothing like the appraising, sizing up kind of questions he had asked me the very first night we met under those string lights. "You built all this yourself," her mother said at one point during dinner, echoing, without even realizing it, the exact words Margot had once said to me in the studio all those months before, back when none of this had even started yet. Piece by piece, I told her, smiling, and I caught Margot grinning at that from across the table, like she remembered exactly where those words had first come from. A full year after that first, chaotic introduction, on Margot's birthday again, I stood in that very same living room, string lights strung along the porch outside just like before, the low jazz coming from that same speaker in the corner of the room. This time, though, I had the silver watch clipped securely inside my own jacket pocket. She had given it to me for good, 3 months earlier, on an evening I know I will not forget for the rest of my life, however long that turns out to be. "My grandfather would have liked you," she told me that night, pressing the watch into my hands one final time, her eyes steady on mine. "He always said the right person makes time feel different somehow, slower in a way, but also like there's suddenly more of it worth having around." Now, a full year after that first birthday, she found me across the room again, the same way she had found me that very first chaotic night, except this time there was no lie standing between us anywhere, nothing left to quietly explain away, nothing that anyone in that room still needed convincing of. "Last year, you had no idea what you were even walking into," she said, smiling at the memory of it now that it no longer stung. "I had some idea," I told her honestly. "I just didn't trust it yet. Not fully. Not the way I do now." She looked at me then the exact way she used to look at that old watch, like she was holding on to something she had already decided, once and for all, was worth every bit of the weight it carried. "This year," she said softly, "you don't have to pretend to be anybody at all." I touched the watch through the fabric of my jacket, feeling that same faint, steady tick against my chest where it now lived, and I thought about how strange it truly is that one lie, told out of fear in a single moment of pressure, could somehow lead two people honestly to exactly where they were always supposed to end up all along. Looking back on all of it now, I think about how easy it would have been to correct her that very first night, to simply pull my hand away and say, "No, that isn't true, we are not together." It would have taken 5 seconds, maybe less. It would have saved us both a boardroom confrontation, a season of real uncertainty, a fight that neither of us actually asked for when it started. But I did not correct her that night, and I am glad, deeply glad, because underneath that one small lie was something entirely true that neither of us had found the courage yet to say out loud on our own. I used to think I was only ever a supporting character in Margot's story, some convenient prop for one difficult, pressured evening. It turns out she had quietly been writing a real place for me long before I ever understood what was actually happening between us, and all it took was one moment of pressure to finally let that truth show itself to both of us at once. So I will leave you with this. If someone you had quietly cared about for a long time used a lie to keep you close by their side, could you find it in yourself to forgive them for it? And do you think, sometimes, that the truth genuinely needs one reckless, unplanned moment before it finally becomes brave enough to show itself to the people who need to see it most? If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me down in the comments exactly what you think about Margot and that old silver watch of hers, the one that started as a family heirloom and ended up carrying our whole story inside it. I will see you in the very next story.